The worst upgrade mistakes aren't made by flippers or bad contractors. They're made by new homeowners, excited, emotional, and ready to make it theirs. What if that $30,000 upgrade actually hurts your home's value? Or in some cases, what if it turns buyers away when you go to sell? Make sure you stick around because I'm going to share the upgrades that people regret the most, why they backfire, and what to focus on instead so that you can get real value and peace of mind. As a real estate agent for over 20 years, I've been into a lot of property and seen a lot of mistakes. Owning a home is an emotional process, and my goal with this video is to save you money, headaches, regret, and ultimately make logical decisions. Now, because I work with a lot of first-time home buyers, most of these buyers have a short time frame in mind when it comes to owning a property. And that's because in many cases, this isn't their forever home. It's something that they're buying to get their feet in the door, if you will, and their goal is to fix it up and maybe sell it and buy a bigger home later on. So understand some of the things that I talk about in today's video, you really need to have a longer term mindset when it comes to buying some of these things, because if you have that shorter term mindset, you're really going to regret doing these home upgrades. And the first one I want to talk about today is solar. Solar is currently one of those things that gets talked about a lot. There's a lot of commercials about it. There's people calling you, texting you on your phone, asking you if you want solar. And from the outside looking in, it looks like it makes a lot of sense. But what I'll tell you is rarely does it actually pencil out unless you have that longer term time horizon. So if you're someone that plans on being in your home long term, then solar can actually be one of those upgrades that makes a lot of sense. But in my experience, what I see is a lot of buyers that put solar on their home end up having regrets later down the road. And that's because instead of purchasing that solar outright, they decide to finance it or lease it in some cases, which means instead of paying your utility bill, you're now just paying another bill to another company, usually for a similar amount that you would normally pay a utility company. So you're just trading one bill for another. But because most homeowners don't keep their homes long term, they use them for a short period of time to build equity, sell that home, and then buy another. What happens is that they end up having regrets when it comes to selling that home. And that's because if you have leased or financed solar on your home and you go to sell that home, not only has to want solar on their home, but now they have to qualify for that solar. So they have to go through the same process that you did when you originally put that solar on your home. And the one thing I've noticed from my experience is a lot of buyers out there don't want solar on their home because it doesn't end up penciling out. Unless you're in an area that gets really, really hot and you run the AC all day long and you're constantly using your washer and dryer and your dishwasher and you just have a lot of appliances going all the time, rarely does that solar end up paying for itself. So before you run out and put solar on your home, I would suggest living in your home for a period of time. Run your appliances and your air conditioning and all these things like you normally would to get some sort of baseline as to what you're going to be spending every single month. And then talk to a solar company, not just one solar company, but talk to several different solar companies. Because what I'll tell you is the more solar companies you talk to, the more confused you're probably going to get on what it costs. And that's because these companies charge different things. Some recommend 20 panels, whereas another might recommend 10 or 15 for the same output. And while you're doing that, I would suggest not getting caught up in the warranties. A lot of these solar companies are going to promise you a warranty. They're going to promise you that when you go to do a roof repair on your home, that they're going to remove these solar panels one time for you for no charge. Well, one thing I've noticed is that these solar companies aren't around in 10, 15 years, and that's because they end up going out of business, which in many cases makes your warranty null and void. And on top of that, remember, these solar panels don't last forever. So at some point, they're going to need maintenance. They're going to need to be replaced. So this isn't just a one-time fee where you have solar panels put on your house and nothing else needs to be done. But with that said, if you are someone who decides to put solar on your home, just make sure you go with the owned solar. Try to pay it up front so that the fee is actually paid. You don't have to worry about it every month, and you start reaping the rewards immediately. Now, in many cases, it's going to take you a minimum of 10 years to recoup that original cost. But even then, if you start penciling out the numbers and it's going to take you 15, 20 plus years to recoup that cost on the solar, then my suggestion is to not do it, especially if you plan on only owning that home a couple of years. Now, the next one I want to talk about is something I've actually done myself, and that is a swimming pool. Swimming pools are often one of those things that we think we're going to use all the time. They have big upfront cost. They come with higher monthly insurance every single month for your home, and in some cases, a very limited use. Now, I know what you're thinking. If I do a $75,000, $100,000 pool addition to my home, then my home is going to go up by that same amount. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. You're probably only going to get 40, 50% of what that pool cost added back to the value of your home. I actually have a story about myself. About 20 years ago, I decided to put a pool into a home that I owned here in South Orange County. Now, at the time, we weren't really crazy about the area that we lived in because we spent a lot of time near the beach with friends, going out and that sort of thing. But we thought by putting a pool in the home, it would make us want to stay there. We would enjoy the backyard a little bit more, give us a place to hang out, all of that stuff. So we decided to put a pool in. And at that time, it was about $75,000 to add a pool to the home. Well, what we realized really fast is that it was very expensive to heat it all the time. And on top of that, we didn't use it nearly as much as we thought we would. So after a very short period of time, about 6 months after putting that pool in, we decided to sell that home and move closer to the beach, which in my case was a bad investment because that pool cost about $75,000 and it probably only added about $35,000 back to the value of that home. So we would have actually been better off not installing the pool on the home because that would have ended up netting us more money at the end of the day. But with that said, if you're someone who has kids, you plan on being in that home long term, then pools can make a lot of sense, but you just have to understand they're expensive to upgrade, the insurance cost is quite a bit more, and if design changes later down the road, pools are very hard to change. But just understand, as design changes, people want to change their pools as well. In some cases, want to change the layout, which can be very expensive to do. So if you are someone planning on putting a pool in your home, just make sure you have that longer term time horizon and that you're doing it for personal use and not for resale value. Because what I'll tell you is about 50% of people love pools, 50% of people hate pools. There's not really anybody in the middle. Now, the next one I want to talk about kind of goes along with the pool thing, and that is this hardscape overload where people turn their entire backyards, grass and everything, into hardscape. In some cases, that comes with outdoor kitchens and barbecues and maybe even outdoor living areas. And what I'll tell you is that custom barbecues and full outdoor kitchens are very expensive and rarely used like you were thinking in your head when you were originally thinking about installing. On top of that, I think it's a really bad idea to remove all the grass, to remove play areas from the backyards, even though you might not have kids, even though you might not have dogs or what have you. Because if you decide to sell that home in the future, a lot of people are looking for those things. They're looking for areas for the dog to run around. They're looking for areas for kids to play. And many times when you have this excessive hardscape in the backyard, it ends up affecting buyer demand because it's very costly to maintain. It's very costly to change. So rather than go completely over the top and change everything in the backyard to this hardscape, I would recommend having a little bit of it all, right? An area for the dogs and kids to play, maybe an area to cook or entertain, and maybe an area to sit. But the key thing to understand here is not to go over the top with concrete, or in some cases oversized pools that take the entire yard up, because not only are you likely going to regret it later down the road, it's going to end up affecting your resale value if and when you decide to sell that home. Now, before we talk about the over improvements on the interior of the home, I want to take a minute and ask a favor. If you find any value in my videos at all, do me a favor and hit that thumbs up. And if you want to stay updated on everything real estate and mortgage related, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. Now, the things I want to talk about now are over improvements that I see people do that end up hurting the value of their home. And the first thing is overbuilding for the neighborhood. You've probably heard the saying that you want to buy the worst house in the best neighborhood, right? The worst house on the best block. But what you don't want to do is be the biggest, nicest house in your entire neighborhood. Yeah, it's going to get you some attention and people are going to talk about your house. But what I can tell you is it can often backfire, especially when it goes to selling that home. Because if you can't justify the value of that home with comparable sales in your neighborhood, then chances are you're not going to be able to max out all of those improvements that you did to that property to start. In my experience, buyers want value. They want potential. They want an opportunity to make it their own. Rarely do they want something that's completely maxed out where every single thing is done. In addition to that, what I'm seeing at the moment is a lot of people mixing different styles. They're watching HGTV and they see this farmhouse style, and then they see this modern style, this very contemporary. And then maybe they're watching another show and they see this industrial look, and then what they start to do is they take a piece from here and a piece from there, and then they start to mix them all together. Well, what I can tell you is mixing a lot of different styles ends up hurting the value of your home, and once again could limit your buyer pool if and when you decide to sell your home. I know I keep talking about selling your home, and you're a homeowner, you're somebody that owns a home, and you may never intend on selling that home, which is completely fine. But what I encourage you to do is when you start doing some of these upgrades, you're thinking about things, think about how a buyer might perceive them. Because in my experience, even those people, they plan on keeping that home forever. They're doing upgrades because they want to do them, because they like the style. Well, they end up having regrets later down the road when they go go to sell that home because it ends up affecting the buyer pool of people interested in that home. And that's going to lead me into talking about converting rooms, or in some cases garages. When we purchased our home that we own now, the owner had taken an entire bedroom and turned it into a closet. Now, it was a very nice closet with nice custom built-ins, but we needed all 4 bedrooms of that home. And because one of the rooms in the house was an entire closet, we had to rip it out. And he spent a lot of money upgrading that room. Now, in my opinion, had he put that home on the open market, had he removed that closet, he probably would have ended up getting more money for that home than he would have with the closet installed in there. And that's because there's just less people looking for a home that has an entire bedroom as a closet. And the same thing can be said about garages. A lot of people are converting garages into storage. They're converting garages into accessory dwelling units where people can live in them. Well, in my experience, people want garages. They don't necessarily want to be able to park their car in there, but they want room for storage. They want room for their tools, their different things. And when a garage is completely outfitted as another bedroom or a home, then you take that space away, and that ultimately affects the value of that home. If you're someone who wants to convert your garage to a room, what I would do is add an addition to that garage. Maybe add a second level to that garage where, the area above the garage is rooms or a bedroom or an ADU. That way you still have the storage, the garage underneath, as well as the additional living space on time. Now that can actually create value to the home versus removing value by changing that garage into another space. Now, some other regrets I see homeowners make is they do remodels without actually thinking it through. Maybe they'll go in, they'll remodel the kitchen, they'll replace the countertops, they'll replace the cabinets, they'll do appliances here and there, but they don't remove walls, but they don't actually go through the process of having someone come in and help them with the design. And then later down the road, what happens is they end up walking into their neighbor's house that has the exact same floor plan where they did it the right way. And then ultimately this homeowner has regrets because they didn't walk through the process the right way. You don't want to do remodels just by putting lipstick on a pig. And that's because kitchen and bathroom remodels can be very, very expensive. And that's because the last thing you want to do is do a remodel that you end up having to redo later down the road because you didn't do it the right way to start. Now, while we're on the subject of kitchen remodels, if you plan on redoing your kitchen, please don't do open shelving. And the reason I say that is because by doing open shelving, you're actually limiting storage in a very, very big way. And you're going to hurt your buyer pool. There are less people out there interested in that type of design, which could ultimately impact your resale value in the future. In addition to that, I don't think you need to do super high-end appliances in a kitchen. Now, if you're in a multi-million-dollar home in a high-end area, then yes, high-end appliances are necessary in those markets because that's what most buyers are looking for. But in your typical traditional homes, most people aren't looking for built-in fridges. They're not looking for freestanding chef's ranges in a kitchen with this huge hood vent above it. And I know it's really tempting for first-time home buyers to want these high-end appliances. But what I'll tell you is they're typically unnecessary and you're likely never going to get your money back. So instead, just stick with a reliable brand unless you're someone who plans on staying in that home for a very, very long time. If you're a chef and you plan on being in that home forever, then by all means, do the high-end appliances. But if you're someone who's only planning on being in that home for a shorter period of time, then what I'll tell you is the higher-end appliances rarely make sense. Now, the next one I want to talk about is something I'm seeing a lot of recently, and that is a freestanding bathtub. I think these can be stylish in many ways, but impractical at the same time. And that's because they take up more space than a traditional tub, they're tough to clean, and they're rarely used. And best of all, they're often removed in the next remodel. So rather than installing a freestanding tub, what I would recommend is trying to utilize the space in a better way to maximize space so that ultimately you appeal to more buyers if and when you decide to sell that home. So with all of that said, my recommendation is to wait before you decide to upgrade your home. If you're just buying your property now, what I would recommend is moving into the property and living there for a period of time before you do any major renovations to that property. Because by doing that, you're going to learn the flow of the property, you're going to learn, different quirks, and you're going to learn what ultimately needs to be changed about that property. Now, I've actually made this mistake myself. The property that we bought back in 2012, before we moved into that home, we replaced the flooring and we did some cosmetic upgrades here and there and whatever. And then we lived in the property for about 6 months and decided that we probably would have done things differently had we just moved in and lived in the property as it was. Now, if you're in a property that needs a ton of cosmetic work before you can move in there, then maybe you just do the bare minimum to be able to get into the property, and then you wait for the major renovations down the road. But my advice is to fix things in the property first. Go through the home inspection and fix the health and safety items. Fix the things that absolutely have to be done before you move in, and then you can upgrade later down the road. You ultimately want to avoid the trap of avoiding underlying issues in the property. You want to focus on the underlying issues of the property and then do the cosmetic stuff once you've had an opportunity to live in the property for a while. And if and when you decide to do that renovation, you want to set a budget for that renovation and then add some money on top of it, maybe 10, 20%, because it's usually going to end up costing more. You're going to make changes. The contractor might have to make changes in that property. But by adding that 10 to 20% on top of your budget, you'll typically have enough money for those changes without having to go back into your pocketbook. Now with that, remember that contractors overpromise, so be ready for delays when it comes to this process. If you're someone who's doing a remodel prior to moving in, just give yourself some additional time on top of when they said it would be completed before you schedule your move into that home. Otherwise, you're probably going to be disappointed. Now, if you're considering going through the process or talking about doing some of the things that we talked about not to do, what I would recommend is call your real estate agent. Ask them about those upgrades. See how they're going to impact the value. See what they think. They can see what buyers are looking for in your neighborhood, which upgrades are getting more value, which upgrades aren't, so that ultimately you can focus on the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to adding value to your home. If I had to summarize this video in one sentence, what I would say is don't get emotional. Try to make logical decisions. And rather than rushing through upgrades or rushing through the process, try to be more strategic. Focus on the things that are going to add that value long term. But with that said, I hope you found some value in today's video. See you next time.